Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live. You're joining myself, Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson in the studio here in Plymouth, England. And I can tell you that it's raining hard outside, as it has been doing for many weeks. So we're going to ignore the weather outside at the moment, and we're going to bring you up to date with what we see happening in the country, and trying to bring you a bit more of the truth than you will be hearing from mainstream media and the press. So one of the big topics at the moment, which is growing, I think is the correct description, is the subject of security for the Olympics, and the company, which of course is now fully in the spotlight, is G4S Security. What do you think's happening with this at the moment, Mike?
Well, this looks to me like a sort of controlled opposition going on at the moment. So we've got lots of stuff in the BBC and other mainstream media covering. Well, they're saying that it's a problem of recruitment, that there aren't enough people.
Yeah.
But of course, Ben Fellows has made some very specific allegations regarding the quality of the training that's being given. And that doesn't seem to be getting any coverage in the media at all. So, you know, for example, he's saying that people operating X-ray machines are not properly trained. He's saying that the evacuation procedure for the various venues is not being, people aren't being trained in the process. And he's made some very specific comments about what G4S is not doing. And none of these issues seem to be being addressed at all. And instead we've got this sort of pseudo investigative journalism going on that's pretending to highlight a lot of failures in G4S's ability to provide the service. And it seems to me like a lot of distraction, that in fact they're avoiding focusing on the key issues that Ben raised in the comments that he made.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've learnt with the UK column is the fact that effectively there has been some form of media blackout to do with the Olympics. And I was told that last week mainstream journalists were slowly prepared to admit that for quite some time they've been told that there has been, or there is to be, no bad publicity about the Olympics. So what I'm wondering is if this sort of blackout has actually partly impacted on the security story. So we've got the bizarre situation where Theresa May was informed as long ago as a year, 10 months, that there were serious failings in the security for the Olympics. And we've got G4S, and we've got Nick Buckle, who's the main man in the press at the moment, lamely trying to claim that it's only in the last few weeks that this massive company has not realised that there's been very, very serious and basic flaws in their preparations. So
well, I mean, my view on this, and it is just my view, it looks to me as if a contract has been offered for hundreds of millions of pounds. That G4S has spent, I don't know what the ultimate value of the
400. I think it's 483 million.
500 million. Yeah. Anyway,
500 million.
G4S is spending 50 million on it, as far as I can see, and that's just a rough estimate. And they're pocketing the profit for their shareholders, or else for future, privatization, perhaps. I don't know what what is actually going on. That's just a piece of speculation. But that's, looking as an outsider, looking at what's going on, that's what it seems to be to me.
Yes. Well, one of the things that's emerged in the press concerning Nick Buckle is that his expertise is as a company accountant. So if we do basic analysis on what's happening here with the Olympics, we've got a private company where the man making the key decisions about security, and we're talking not only the security of hundreds of thousands of ordinary people, but effectively we're talking national security. The man making the decisions is simply qualified as an accountant, albeit he's worked within a firm supposedly providing security of some form. And I find this quite extraordinary, and I find it particularly extraordinary that we have government ministers, including Theresa May herself, who are trying to tell the public at the moment that everything is going according to plan, that we're only dealing with glitches. And as you've just said, the G4S security man, Ben Fellows, who came into the studio here in Plymouth a week or more ago now, was prepared to sit and talk on camera and in detail about the failings that he was seeing. And yet those failings, when we're talking about the fact that the scanners weren't working, that language barriers meant that staff that had been taken on couldn't even question anybody because their English wasn't good enough. Their English wasn't good enough to be reading instructions. So we had somebody within G4S prepared to go on camera and talk in detail about the failings. None of these key issues have come into the mainstream press. And I think most telling is that a lady employee of G4S, I can't remember her name at the moment, but she was reported in the press as having been sacked by G4S for daring to blow the whistle. Now, I may have this wrong, but I understood that we now have special protective measures in force for whistleblowers, so that when they blow the whistle on serious subjects, their livelihood and jobs are protected, but apparently that doesn't actually work for G4S. And of course, the other thing that we're now seeing is that we've got a further influx of troops. So we're now up to about 18,000 British troops. We've got G4S Security's own employees. Nobody's too sure of how many there are of the G4S people, because we don't know how many they've trained, but the claim is 10,000, or a minimum of 10,000. And the other bit which is happening in parallel is that there are consistent reports of both European police coming into London via the back door and also foreign troops. And this is something which the government at the moment is refusing to actually comment on, and certainly the mainstream media, including the BBC of course, are simply ignoring all the reports that we are hearing. I know on that a local Devon radio station has been broadcasting this morning. One of the people being interviewed was Ian Crane, who is a very outspoken international speaker on what is really going on in Britain with an emerging police state, and he's also talking about what the banks are really doing. And he was saying that if you analyse the pieces at the moment, what you can see is that London is actually being taken away from the normal democratic control in a city, and it's being taken into something which is increasingly looking like a police state, which is quite worrying.
Well, you know, wouldn't normally cover this kind of subject on this program, but you know, there's a lot of publicity over the fact that Bruce Springsteen and Paul McCartney were cut off during their concert, at the end of the concert last night. Was it last night? Yeah, it was last night. Because they were performing past the 10:30 curfew. And a lot of activity on Twitter calling Britain the police state and things like that. And what's absolutely clear is that there's no legislation that requires them to stop playing at a particular time. This is a decision that's been made within a local authority. A license has been given on the basis of no democratic requirement to do that. It's just somebody's making up the law as they go along, and that's increasingly the case. And certainly the Greater London Authority seems to be paving the way on that.
Yes. Well, we've also had, and I think this is quite encouraging, that we are now getting police who are speaking out on this. And I think it's Surrey, the Chief Constable of Surrey Police has recently decided that he's going to pull out of the privatisation plans because of G4S. Yeah. So we are clearly seeing at the moment that senior British police officers are quite rightly becoming quite unnerved by the fact that we have these unaccountable private companies who are taking up more and more power. Yeah. And I think I'm going to use the word, it's insulting. It must be a gross insult that we've now got mainstream troops soldiers from the British Army, they've been pulled back or they've come back for leave periods from Afghanistan, and they are now being used as cheap labour to come in and prop up this gross failing by G4S. I mean, I don't think you can actually give these guys a bigger insult than the fact that they've been away fighting and risking their lives overseas, and now Cameron's government, and we've got to bring Theresa May fully into the firing line on this, she is using those troops in order to prop up the failings of G4S. It's extraordinary, isn't it, when you analyse it to this level. Something that's in the background, which viewers and listeners may not be aware of, is that if you examine the European plan for the regionalised Europe, and of course in the background or the shadow of the Olympic Games, we've still got Europe, despite all of the economic problems and the crisis, we have Europe driving towards a federal Europe state, is that under the European plans, London was no longer to be a capital city. It was actually to be a key region of the European super state. And it seems interesting that at the moment the Olympics programme is helping to drive London into this situation. So we've got mass evacuation plans, not just to bring people out of the Olympic Stadium if there's a problem. We now know from the whistleblowers inside G4S, we're talking about evacuation plans for the whole of London. And we now know that foreign troops and police are being brought in via the back door, including Woolwich Barracks. And I think the public simply has to ask some key questions, which is what is actually going on.
Yeah. And
none of the MPs are talking about this. Of course, we're in the southwest of England, and the UK Column Live studio is very close to some key Tory areas, but none of the local politicians are really answering any of the questions about what's going on with the Olympics. It's quite extraordinary. So we would say to people, if you're following what UK Column Live is talking about, don't believe everything we say. Go and research it yourself. Get on the internet. Start asking people you know, who you value, if you value their opinion. But we will say to you that at the moment, something sinister is developing around the Olympics, and for this vast global security company to be given serious control over what is basically defence of UK is something that people need to ask about.
Well, it's not just G4S, of course, because there's a host of legislation, which is notionally temporary legislation, which has been put in place in order to facilitate, they say, the Olympics. And some of it is just inane stuff like Sunday shopping, but some of it is security related. And so the question is, will that legislation actually be repealed when they say it'll be repealed?
This is you're talking about the stop and search powers
and other things. It's supposedly temporary legislation put in place for the period of the Olympics and the Paralympics, and so we need to be careful that legislation is actually removed again at the end of the event. Yeah,
and we know from people working within G4S, and we know from ex-military people who are now involved in the security teams in London, that they are actually saying it's their opinion that these additional layers of law are not going to be removed. Yeah. So it almost seems as though the Olympics are being used to help drive down this very, very oppressive government control through the public sector.
It highlights a key responsibility that we all have as individuals, and that is to watch what government is doing, and make sure that government isn't sliding stuff in under the radar that we aren't aware of. This is why we're in the mess that we're in, because we're not paying enough attention to what government does. So we've got. I think this is a key one we've got to keep an eye on.
Yes. Well, there's a couple of things which we could perhaps link in with what we're talking about with the Olympics. I'd just like to give a mention to Liam Fox MP, because I was very intrigued to get hold of a copy of the Telegraph yesterday. So this is the Sunday Telegraph, and we've got a big article which is all about Liam Fox. Now, the reason I'm intrigued about this, and I think that perhaps viewers and listeners might be intrigued, is Liam Fox is the man, of course, who but a few months ago was exposed as having broken a number of serious ministerial codes by conducting meetings about defence with his then colleague and partner in tow, who was totally unsecurity checked. So we had a key Tory minister who was conducting meetings with both the Americans and the Israelis behind closed doors, with somebody present who was not even security cleared. And we have never actually, in the British media and press, heard the details of what was being discussed in those meetings. But clearly the breach was serious enough for Liam Fox to be removed from his post. And for me, it's remarkable that we should now see the Daily Telegraph devoting a full page to what this man believes, what this man thinks that David Cameron should and should not be doing, what his opinion is of Cameron, Osborne and the coalition. If we look into Liam Fox's background and what he was actually doing while he was supposedly looking after Britain's defence, he was clearly in bed with a large number of the very same private corporations that we're now seeing being brought into positions of power, be it G4S for the London Olympics, or also Serco, which of course is another huge global company, which is now being given control of Britain's borders. So I'm not sure what the Daily Telegraph is up to, but I think it is interesting that all of a sudden, as we've got problems at the Olympics, they're plugging Liam Fox. Something that he claims in the article, which I'd just like to mention because we talked about the troops. He says, when I was at the Ministry of Defence, I thought we were doing much better helping people who've been physically injured in combat. I think we were getting a bit better at helping people who had been mentally injured. Now, this is a remarkable statement from a man, of course, who has presided over huge cuts in manpower and equipment and indeed expertise for the armed forces. So with one hand, troops are being exposed to greater risk overseas in Afghanistan, and here is this man talking about doing a bit better. I think this is propaganda by the Telegraph, and I think that in the background Liam Fox is being brought into position to try and help stem the truth coming out about G4, but I could be wrong.
Or could he be being lined up for a Foreign Secretary's job, perhaps?
Well, we're hearing some interesting things, aren't we, at the moment, because it does appear that Nick Osborne is now, George Osborne is under pressure. Clearly he is a very weak Chancellor, and we are seeing that the present decline of the banking system is not an area which he's confident to operate in. So the papers have been reporting over the weekend that there are going to be some changes in the Tory cabinet, and George Osborne looks like a casualty, with William Hague being lined up. So you could be right about Liam Fox. Now, a name that I know you're keen to just have a few words on is Nick Herbert. And this brings us on to the subject of policing and the justice system. It
was a follow-up to last Friday's coverage of House of Lords reform and the destruction of the Constitution. And I just thought it was a bit ironic, and maybe this was what he was doing, but again, it was in the Telegraph. He had an article called Victims of Crime Deserve Swift Justice. And I'm not going to go into details of what the article was about, but he was quite happy to cite Magna Carta within the article.
Yeah.
And I just was interested that a minister for policing and criminal justice is acknowledging the existence of a document like Magna Carta in the context of modern day politics, because obviously the agenda of the coalition is to destroy as much as possible our constitution.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to say more than that at this point. I just wanted to highlight that article. If you go onto the Telegraph website and just do a search for Magna Carta, you'll find that article. It's called "Victims of Crime Deserve Swift Justice."
Well, what's your feeling though? Is he bringing this forward because he's trying to make a positive statement about Magna Carta, or do you think it's to do with bringing this forward as a non-issue?
No, I think either he's sent a message that reminding people that Magna Carta still exists,
Yeah.
or he's just being a bit disingenuous, maybe, or a bit hypocritical in invoking Magna Carta when it suits him, but quite happy to as a government as a whole, quite happy to destroy any concept of the principles within Magna Carta.
Yeah.
So it may be that he's I don't have an opinion at this point on which side of that he's on, and I'll leave it to viewers to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
I just highlight it as an interesting
topic.
Point.
Yeah. Well, it in fact ties in quite nicely, because if we're talking about a creeping police state coming in around the Olympics, and we've got the comments by this gentleman over Magna Carta, the other subject which we'd like to bring into the news programme today is, of course, Roger Hayes, the chairman of the British Constitution Group, who has been speaking out now for many years on the subject of common law, and of course the Magna Carta is a key part of that. And Roger has been warning that successive governments have been undermining and hacking away at both our constitution and common law. I had an update on Roger because he's been sent to prison basically for his for withholding his council tax on the basis the money's being used unlawfully, it's been very interesting that at the beginning of his stay in Liverpool prison, Roger was being treated quite nicely by the prison authorities, and in particular the Deputy Governor, Mr. Stephen Bean, was quite receptive to people concerned about Roger, and indeed we had Mr. Danny Bamping who got in to talk to Roger and collect some legal documents from him. But in the call that I've had this morning with an update, it's now apparent that there's been a change of heart by Mr. Stephen Bean, to the extent that Roger can't get his legal team in there. Now these are Mackenzie friends, these are lay legal advisors, but nevertheless Roger has an absolute right under the law of this country to be able to speak to his legal representatives in prison. And at the moment the Deputy Prison Governor for Liverpool is refusing those people the right of entry. And the significance of this in particular is that Roger has had 21 days to get a full appeal in place. Other routes to get him out of the prison have been tried and have been rebuffed by successive judges, such as habeas corpus. But at midnight tomorrow, at midnight tomorrow, basically that will be the deadline for getting a full appeal in. And at the moment, Roger's team can't do that because the prison governor is blocking the team from going in to see him. So we have the situation at the moment where throughout the country, and I keep emphasising this for viewers and listeners, we're not simply talking about the Tory party, because we are talking about the Tory party working hand in glove with the Lib Dems, and we've seen exactly the same policy and agenda applied by Miliband, Blair and Cameron. So this is a cross-party agenda to attack and undermine common law. And Roger, as one of the most outspoken people about these serious attacks, has been simply lifted by the police and put in prison without any form of proper trial. Now, I'm quite sure that there will be viewers and listeners out there today, maybe new to the programme, who will start to say to themselves, this cannot be true. And I would just repeat once again that please listen to what we have and watch what we have to say, but do go away and check it yourself, and you will find that what we are talking about is absolutely correct. And if you simply do a little bit of trawling back through the national press over the last few months, you will have seen, for example, Arch-Tory Ken Clarke absolutely pushing and pushing for more courts to be running with no juries, but simply an appointed and politically controlled judge. Now, this is the sort of thing which we see Mr. Cameron strutting the international stage, claiming that we live here in Britain, in one of the most democratic countries in the world, whereas the truth under our noses is the fact that we're seeing that those freedoms and that democracy absolutely stripped away from us by politicians who are simply not telling the truth. So we'll keep you posted on what's going to happen with Roger. We know that his family have been in to visit him. Finally, they did get in to visit him in the last few days, and we believe that Roger should be out this Friday, but at the moment, because of the clampdown by Liverpool Prison, there's no further news. If any of the viewers or listeners feel that this is a very bad situation and you want to contact the prison or police, you can find the details and the contact numbers on the UK Column website in the article under Roger, and we'll repost those again today. So overall, a massive clampdown on liberty, but we've got some other items here. I don't know whether you've got anything else you want to drop in, but I was going to give the NHS a mention. I think this is very key. We've got a government at the moment that's consistently claiming there isn't money available to run the NHS properly. The same government seems to have unlimited money to run the Olympics and unlimited money to pay G4S security. But we're seeing reports that basically local NHS trusts are now in such dire financial straits that they are actively talking about salary cuts for nurses and key workers within the NHS.
Well, what staggered me about this story, I mean, Derriford Hospital in Plymouth is one of the key hospitals that's involved in this, and what they're saying is that they're going to begin by offering a 5% pay cut, and if staff don't want to accept a 5% pay cut, they will fire the staff and then offer them a new contract of employment.
Yep.
So they don't actually, this would not be a redundancy process, and to be honest, I don't quite see how any of this is legal, but clearly that isn't much of a concern for them, but this is the threat. The threat is that if you don't accept the 5% pay cut, you'll lose your job, and then you have a choice to make whether you want to take the alternative job which is offered, which will be the same job that you were doing before, yep, on new terms and conditions, or you go onto the dole. And yep, it's you know, if this doesn't waken people up to what is actually going on with, you know, the fact, as you say, money is no problem finding money for the banks, but for salaries you can't have it.
Doctors and nurses' salaries. Yes. Well, what I picked up out of this was, of course, this is exactly the same scam that the Labour government used with civil servants, and in particular people employed by local authorities. So they introduced the scheme where people had to reapply for their own jobs, and what then started to happen, of course, is that the only people who were being accepted to stay on in their jobs were people who basically were going to toe the party, yes, political line. So what I believe is happening here is that the state is now starting to say, we want to control individual doctors and key nurses within the establishment. If you don't like what we're pushing through, you're not going to get your job back. And we're not talking one or two hospitals here. I'm looking on screen at an article from the Daily Mail, and they're actually talking about 19 hospital trusts.
Well, the report I saw said 35 hospitals within the southwest,
right?
Just in the southwest. I don't know what's going on in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
Whether the southwest is being used as a pilot for this, but that's 35 hospitals in the southwest.
Right. So we wait and see where that leads. But it's not surprising that the UK column is getting the number of calls we are and emails from people within the NHS, because clearly there's one rule for the NHS and another for G4S security.
Yeah.
So we're just coming up to the end of the show. I think just like to briefly mention that, of course, the BBC, as usual, is failing to report the truth to the nation with events in Europe at the moment. We've got serious unrest in Spain at the moment, which is not being properly reported. But we've had some interesting events in Germany. Do you want to just comment on that with regard to the police?
Well, I mean, we've been hearing about this for a few months now, that where there've been protests regarding austerity or other, particularly the financial situation and the bailout of Europe, that the police have in fact been removing their helmets. The riot police we're talking about have been taking their helmets off and joining the protests in some numbers. So we have been hearing about that for a while. But I'll just say in closing that we'll do an economic update tomorrow, and we'll talk a bit about Spain.
Okay.
That'll be one of the subjects on the list for tomorrow.
That's excellent. So looking at the clock, we're on time. So I'm going to say goodbye from here at UK Column Live. We'll be back with you at 12 o'clock tomorrow, and I hope that you will join us again. If you've enjoyed the show, please tell your friends, pass it on, tweet and Twitter, as we need all the help we can get.